The monitor beeped, slow, steady, then fast. Then it screamed. That sound, that single, piercing sound at 2:47. In the morning is something Sarah Mitchell would never forget for the rest of her life. Not because she was the patient, but because she was the mother standing outside the glass door, pressing both hands flat against the cold surface, watching her 8-year-old daughter fight for every breath on the other side. And there was nothing she could do. Nothing except pray and hope that the people inside that room cared enough to save a little girl whose mother couldn't afford to pay their bills. Sarah was 34 years old, a single mother from a small town in rural Ohio. She worked double shifts at a laundromat 6 days a week, folding other people's clothes, pressing other people's shirts, making sure other people looked presentable for their lives, while slowly, quietly, her own life was unraveling at the seams. Her daughter Lily was 8, bright-eyed, gap-toothed, obsessed with butterflies and the color yellow. Lily had a habit of drawing suns on every piece of paper she could find: napkins, school books, the back of grocery receipts. She said the world needed more suns. She said dark things scared her. She had no idea that her own body was carrying something dark inside it. It started with headaches, small ones, the kind you brush off and blame on too much screen time or not enough sleep. Then came the nausea, then the blurred vision. Then one Tuesday afternoon in October, Lily collapsed in the middle of her school cafeteria, her lunch tray clattering to the floor, her small body folding like paper. By the time Sarah rushed to the hospital, Lily was already in the emergency room. By the time the doctor came out with the results, Sarah's whole world had already changed. "Mrs. Mitchell," the neurologist, Dr. Anand Kapoor, said. He was a tall man with careful eyes and a measured voice, the kind of voice that had delivered difficult news many times before. "We found a mass on the left side of Lily's brain. It's pressing against critical regions. We need to act quickly." Sarah stared at him. "A mass," she repeated. The word felt wrong in her mouth, foreign, like a word from a language she hadn't learned yet. "A tumor," he said gently. "We believe it's operable, but the surgery is complex. It's a high-risk procedure. The longer we wait, the more pressure builds. We're looking at a very narrow window here." Sarah sat down, or maybe her legs just gave out. She wasn't sure. "How much?" she whispered. Dr. Kapoor paused. "The estimated cost for the surgery, ICU stay, and post-operative care is approximately $94,000. $94,000. Sarah made $11 an hour. She had $312 in her checking account. She had no health insurance. She'd lost it when the laundromat changed ownership 6 months ago, and the new employer didn't offer coverage. She had no savings. No family nearby. Her parents were gone. Lily's father had walked out 4 years ago and never looked back. The next 48 hours were a different kind of pain. Not the sharp, sudden pain of a wound, but the slow, grinding pain of a system that wasn't built for people like her. She sat in the hospital's financial counseling office and listened to a woman explain options she didn't qualify for. She called every charity number the social worker gave her. She sat on hold for hours. She was told to apply for emergency Medicaid, a process that could take weeks. Lily didn't have weeks. She filled out forms. She was denied. She filled out more forms. She went back to Dr. Kapoor's office and asked if they could do the surgery first and figure out payment later. The hospital administrator, a man named Gerald Holt, was in that meeting. He wore a pressed suit and spoke with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to keep emotion out of business. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is incredibly difficult, but our policy requires financial clearance before elective surgical procedures." "Elective?" Sarah's voice cracked. Her brain is swelling. "You're calling that elective?" Emergency interventions are handled differently, of course, but this surgery, while urgent, falls into a scheduled category. "She's 8 years old." Sarah's voice dropped to almost nothing. "She draws suns on everything because she's afraid of the dark. She is my entire world, please." Gerald Holt looked at his papers. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, I truly am. But my hands are tied by hospital policy." Sarah walked out of that office and sat in a hallway chair and did not cry. She had moved past crying. She sat there in the yellow fluorescent light of a hospital corridor and stared at the floor and felt utterly, completely alone. That's when Margaret found her. Margaret Osei was 61 years old, a registered nurse who had worked in the neurology ward of that same hospital for 22 years. She had short, natural hair going silver at the temples, reading glasses that perpetually sat on top of her head, and a way of walking into a room that made people feel like someone was finally paying attention. She had seen Sarah sitting in that hallway before. She'd watched her come and go from the financial office. She'd seen the forms. She'd heard bits of conversations through open doors. And now she sat down in the plastic chair beside her, not across from her, not at a distance, right beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Tell me about her," Margaret said. Sarah looked up. "What?" "Your daughter. Tell me about her." Something about the simplicity of that question broke through the wall. Sarah talked. She talked about the sons Lily drew everywhere, about how she insisted on wearing yellow rain boots, even in summer, about how she'd made Sarah a birthday card last year that said, "You are my favorite person in the whole entire solar system," about how she sang to herself while she did homework, about how she was afraid of the dark but never afraid of anything else. Margaret listened to all of it, every word. Then she said, "I've been a nurse here for 22 years, and in 22 years I have never once regretted fighting for a child. Can I make some phone calls?" What happened next was not a miracle. Let that be clear. It was not magic. It was not luck. It was human beings choosing one by one to do something hard. Margaret started with Dr. Kapoor. She knocked on his office door at 7 in the morning before his rounds and laid out Lily's case not as a medical file, but as a story. He listened. He had a daughter of his own. He agreed to defer his surgical fee entirely. Then she went to the hospital chaplain, Father Dennis, who had quiet connections to a local Catholic foundation that provided emergency funds for pediatric cases. He made a call. They agreed to cover $30,000. Margaret posted Lily's story carefully, without identifying details, with Sarah's permission, in a private network of hospital staff across 3 counties, within 18 hours. Donations from doctors, nurses, janitors, and cafeteria workers had raised just over $22,000. She walked into Gerald Holt's office with documentation of every dollar. She placed it on his desk. She looked at him without blinking and said, "I need you to authorize this surgery today. We have partial funding, a deferred physician fee, and an emergency charity grant. The rest can be structured as a long-term, zero-interest payment arrangement. This child cannot wait." Gerald Holt looked at the papers for a long time. There are moments in life when policy meets humanity. When a rule written in a boardroom comes face to face with a little girl who draws sons because she is afraid of the dark. Gerald Holt had been in hospital administration for 16 years. He had made hundreds of decisions from behind a desk. But he was also a father, and in that moment the father won. "Authorize it," he said quietly. "I'll handle the paperwork." Lily went into surgery at 6:15 on a Thursday morning. Sarah sat in the surgical waiting room alone for the first 2 hours. Then Margaret came and sat beside her. Then Dr. Kapoor's nurse came and brought coffee. Then the chaplain came. Then 2 nurses from the ICU ward who had heard the story and just wanted to be there. By the time the surgery ended, 4 hours and 38 minutes later, Sarah was not alone at all. Dr. Kapoor came through the doors and Sarah stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. He was smiling, tired, careful, but smiling. "We got it," he said. "Complete resection. Clean margins. She's in recovery. She's asking for you." Sarah Mitchell made a sound that was not quite a word. She pressed both hands over her mouth and her knees buckled, and Margaret caught her, both arms around her, and held her up. Lily stayed in the ICU for 4 days, then the neurology ward for 6 more. Sarah barely left the building. She slept in the chair beside Lily's bed, woke up every time a monitor beeped, held her daughter's hand through every blood draw and every confused, groggy waking moment. On the 9th day, Lily asked for paper. A nurse brought her a notepad. Lily took a crayon, yellow, and slowly, carefully. With her left hand, because her right was still connected to an IV line, she drew a sun. She gave it to Margaret. Margaret, who had worked 22 years, without ever once putting a patient's drawing on her locker door, taped that sun right in the center of it. It stayed there for years. On the morning Lily was discharged, Gerald Holt was standing in the hospital lobby. He wasn't sure why he'd come down. He told himself it was routine. But when he saw that little girl walk out in yellow rain boots, actual yellow rain boots that Sarah had gone home to get because Lily had refused to leave without them, he felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Lily stopped in front of him, looked up at him with her gap-toothed smile and said, "Are you the one who said yes?" He crouched down to her level. "One of them," he said. She nodded seriously, the way 8-year-olds do when they are considering something important. Then she patted his hand once and walked out into the sunlight. There is a belief that the world is hard and cold and built for those who already have, that systems are walls. That kindness is rare, and sometimes, many times, that belief feels like the truth. But here is what is also true. Margaret Osei got up one morning and chose to sit beside a stranger in a hallway. A surgeon chose to defer his fee. A room full of hospital workers chose to give what they could. A man behind a desk chose to let humanity win over policy. None of it was easy. All of it was chosen. That is the thing about kindness. It is never accidental. It is always a decision, made in a moment when indifference would have been far easier. And when enough people make that decision, even small ones, even quiet ones, something changes. Someone lives. Someone walks out in yellow rain boots into the morning sun. The world needs more people who choose, and maybe, just maybe, you are one of them. If this story moved something in you, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Soul of Kindness exists for people who still believe in the power of human compassion and who want to be reminded of it. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And before you go, we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed everything? A moment in a hospital, a waiting room, a hallway, where someone chose humanity over everything else. Tell us in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to keep going.